I was 63 years old when a hospital called me about a child I didn't know existed. I want to be clear about that. 63. Retired. Living alone in a 2-bedroom house in Spokane, Washington that still had my ex-wife's curtains in the kitchen because I never bothered to take them down. I drove a 2019 Ford F-150 that I kept cleaner than I kept myself. I had a doctor's appointment every 3 months for my blood pressure. I fed a stray cat that showed up on my back porch sometime in the fall and never left. That was my life. That was my life. That was the whole of it. The call came on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just gotten back from the hardware store. I was replacing the weather stripping on the side door, and I had the wrong size, so I was annoyed before I even answered. The woman on the phone said she was a social worker at Providence Sacred Heart Medical Center. She asked if I was Leonard Paul Kowalski. I said yes. She asked if I knew a woman named Claire Ann Whitfield. I sat down on the porch steps. Claire. I hadn't heard that name in almost 8 years. I told the social worker yes, I knew Claire. We had been together for about 6 months back in 2017. It didn't work out. We didn't end badly, just quietly. She moved to Portland. I stayed in Spokane. People drift, that's all it was. The social worker paused. Then she said Claire had passed away 2 days ago. A brain aneurysm. She was 41 years old. I said I was sorry to hear that, and I meant it. Claire was a good person. Then the social worker said there was a child, a boy, 7 years old. His name was Miles. He had been at the hospital since they brought Claire in, and there was no other family. No husband, no father listed on the birth certificate. But Claire had left something. An envelope in her bedside drawer at home, with my name and phone number written on the front in her handwriting. I didn't say anything for a long time. The social worker said, "Mr. Kowalski, we need someone to come in." I drove to the hospital in under 20 minutes. I didn't even change out my old jeans. The social worker's name was Nancy. She met me in the lobby. She was probably 45, tired eyes, sensible shoes. She shook my hand and thanked me for coming so quickly. She walked me to a small room near the pediatric unit that had a table and some chairs and a plastic bin of Legos in the corner. Miles was sitting at the table. He had dark hair, cut short. He was wearing a grey long-sleeved shirt and jeans that were a little too big. He had a small backpack in his lap that he was holding with both arms, like he was protecting it. When I walked in, he looked up at me. I don't know what I expected. I don't know what I was looking for in his face. I just stood there in the doorway like a fool. Nancy introduced us. She said, "Miles, this is Mr. Kowalski. He knew your mom." Miles looked at me for a moment. Then he said, quietly, "I know. She showed me a picture of you. I had to sit down." Nancy stepped out to give us a minute. I pulled out a chair across from the boy, and I sat down. He watched me the whole time. He had Claire's eyes. That same dark brown, very still, very watchful. I asked him how old he was. He told me 7. I asked him what grade. He said 2nd. I asked him if he was hungry, and he shook his head. But I could tell he was lying because I raised 2 sons, and I know what a 7-year-old looks like when he's pretending not to need something. I went and found a vending machine and bought him a pack of peanut butter crackers and a Sprite. When I set them on the table in front of him, something in his face shifted just slightly. He opened the crackers very carefully and ate them one at a time. I watched him and I thought, "Claire, what did you do?" Nancy came back after a while and explained the situation. Claire had no living parents. Her only sibling was a brother named Ted who lived in Phoenix. But he and Claire had been estranged for years, and he had already told the caseworker he was not in a position to take the child. She said that without a named father, Miles would go into foster care unless someone else came forward. She said Claire's envelope might clarify things. She handed it to me. My name was on the front. Leonard. Just that. Her handwriting hadn't changed. I opened it at the table in front of Miles because somehow it didn't feel right to read it privately. He watched me unfold the letter. It was 2 pages both sides, written in blue pen. She started by saying she was sorry, that she had written this letter 3 times and thrown it away, and she hoped she never had to use it. But she was leaving it just in case, because she knew herself well enough to know she might run out of time before she found the courage to call. She said she found out she was pregnant about 6 weeks after we stopped talking. She said she almost called me 100 times. She said she convinced herself I wouldn't want this, that I was already in my mid-50s and had grown kids, that she didn't want to disrupt my life, that she could do it on her own and she had done it on her own and Miles was the best thing that ever happened to her. She said she was sorry for making that decision without me, that she had thought about it every year, especially on his birthdays, that she had started to tell me twice and lost her nerve both times. She said Miles was healthy and funny and stubborn and loved baseball and had her father's ears, and she thought sometimes that he had my laugh. She said she wasn't asking me to do anything. She just wanted me to know he existed. She wanted someone to know he existed. She wanted someone to know he existed. And then she said, if you're reading this because something happened to me, I'm not asking you to take him. I'm just asking you to make sure he's okay. You were always a good man, Leonard. That's why I picked you. I folded the letter. Miles watching me. I said, your mum wrote you down pretty good. He thought about that. Then he said, she wrote about you too, in her journal. She let me read part of it once. She said you were funny. I laughed. It came out rough. I said, I don't know if that's true. He said, she was usually right about things. I said, yeah, I think she was. Nancy walked me to her office after that, and we talked for a long time. She was straightforward about everything, which I appreciated. She said the DNA question would need to be addressed before any legal steps could happen. She said even with Claire's letter, paternity would need to be confirmed. She said this was normal and necessary and not a reflection on anyone's intentions. I said I understood. I said I wanted the test done as soon as possible. She asked if I was saying I was willing to be considered as a placement. I told her I needed a day. Not because I was going to say no. I just needed to think clearly about what I was walking into, and I thought Claire would have respected that about me. I drove home. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a while. I called my oldest son Kevin. He's 38, lives in Boise, works in construction management. Kevin is practical and honest, and he doesn't waste your time. I told him everything. There was a long silence on his end. He said, Dad, are you sure this is real? I said. She left me a letter with her handwriting on it, and there's a 7-year-old sitting in a hospital right now who held onto a backpack like it was the only thing he had left in the world. Yeah, it's real. Another silence. Then he said, what do you want to do? I said I didn't know yet. He said, I think you do know. I think you called me because you already decided and you wanted to hear if I'd talk you out of it. I said nothing. He said, I'm not going to talk you out of it. I sat there in the driveway a little longer after we hung up. The stray cat came and sat on the hood of the truck, which it did sometimes, and looked at me. I went inside and cleaned the house. The DNA test came back 10 days later. 99.8% probability. Miles was my son. I was 63 years old and I had a 7-year-old son. I sat with that for about 45 seconds and then I called Nancy and said, let's talk about next steps. The process was not fast. I want to be honest about that for anyone who thinks these things happen overnight. There were home visits, there were background checks. There were forms that required information I had to dig through old file folders to find. My house had to be evaluated. My finances had to be reviewed. I had to sit with a family therapist twice, which I won't pretend was easy, because I am a 63-year-old man from a generation that was not encouraged to sit in a chair and talk about how things made me feel. But I did it. I showed up for every appointment. I answered every question. Miles was placed with me temporarily while the process was ongoing. Nancy brought him to my house on a Saturday morning in late November. He had 2 garbage bags of belongings in his backpack. The backpack, I had come to understand, contained a spiral notebook, 3 baseball cards, a broken watch that had belonged to Claire's father, and a photograph of his mother. He stood in my living room and looked around. I had cleaned everything. I had put new sheets on the bed in the second bedroom. I had gone to Target and bought a lamp and a small rug and one of those posters of a baseball stadium, because I remembered he liked baseball and I didn't know what else to do. It probably wasn't the right poster. It was just something. He looked at the room and didn't say much. He put his backpack on the bed and sat down next to it. I said, "We can change anything you don't like." He said, "It's okay." I said, "I mean it. The rug color, the poster, anything." He looked at the baseball poster a moment. Then he said, "Is that Fenway?" I said, "I think so." I honestly wasn't sure. He said, "I like the Red Sox." I said, "That might be the only thing I hold against your mother." He looked at me. Then, very quietly, he smiled. It was the first time I had seen him smile. It was small and quick, and it went away fast. But it was there. My younger son, Danny, drove up from Portland 2 weeks after Miles moved in. Danny is 34, and he takes after his mother in the sense that he is very direct and will say exactly what he thinks before he's fully thought it through. He walked in the front door, looked at Miles sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal, and said, "So you're the surprise." Miles looked at him. Danny said, "I'm Danny, the less responsible son." Miles said, "How many sons does he have?" Danny said, "2. Kevin and me. Kevin is the responsible one. He's in Boise." Miles considered this. He said, "Are you going to be my brothers?" Danny looked at me. I looked back at him. Neither of us had talked about this. Neither of us had decided anything. Danny said, "Yeah, if you want. Is that okay with you?" Miles went back to his cereal. He said, "Yeah, that's okay with me." Danny stayed 3 days. He took Miles to a sporting goods store and let him pick out a new glove. He taught him how to throw a spiral in the backyard, which Miles was skeptical about since it wasn't baseball. But he learned it anyway. He was good at it. He had good hands. When Danny left, he shook my hand at the car and said, "You're doing the right thing, Dad." I said I wasn't sure I was doing it right. There was a difference. He said, "Nobody does it right. You just do it." The harder part came about a month in. Claire's brother, Ted, called me. I don't know how he got my number. I assumed through the caseworker. He had changed his mind about not wanting involvement. He didn't want custody. He was clear about that, but he had opinions. He thought Miles should stay connected to Claire's side of the family. He thought it was strange that a man in his 60s was doing this. He used the word strange more than once. I told him I understood his concern. I told him I had no intention of cutting Miles off from Claire's family if Claire's family wanted to be present. I told him the door was open. He said he appreciated that, but he wanted to meet me first. We met at a diner in Spokane. Ted was 53, stocky, wore a polo shirt. He shook my hand hard in the way some men do when they're trying to size you up. We ordered coffee. He asked me directly, what was my relationship with Claire? I told him the truth. We were together about 6 months. It was good, but it didn't work out. We parted on good terms. I had no idea she was pregnant. He studied me for a while. He said, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "Because she asked me to make sure he was okay." He said, "The letter said she wasn't asking you to take him." I said, "I know, but she asked me to make sure he was okay, and the only way I know how to make sure a kid is okay is to be there. I'm too old to pretend otherwise." Ted was quiet for a while. He drank his coffee. He said he hadn't talked to Claire in almost 4 years, and he regretted that, and he was trying to figure out how to live with it. I said I thought the best way to honor someone you lost was to take care of what they left behind. He looked at me. Something in his face settled. He came to Spokane for Christmas that year. He brought Miles a baseball bat, a real one, wood, with his name engraved on the barrel. Miles held it for a long time without saying anything, and I could tell he was trying not to cry, and I gave him the space to not cry, and I gave him the space to not cry if that's what he needed. Ted and I are not close, but we are civil. We talk on the phone every couple of months. He's Miles's uncle, and that matters. The adoption was finalized on a Thursday in March. It was not a dramatic day. There was no crowd in the courtroom. It was me and Miles and Kevin who drove down from Boise for it. The judge was a woman about my age who read through everything carefully and asked Miles one question: was this what he wanted? Miles said yes, ma'am. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at me. She said it was good to see people do the right thing. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Afterward, we went to a diner, and Kevin bought Miles a milkshake and let him put a ridiculous number of cherries on it. Miles counted them out loud. There were 11. He was very pleased about this. Kevin looked at me across the table while Miles was focused on his milkshake. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I want to say something about what it's like to be an older father. Because people ask, and because I think it's worth being honest about. It is harder physically than I expected. I am not a young man. I get tired. I have mornings when my back is bad. And Miles needs to be at school by 8. And the combination of those two things is a real negotiation. I can't run the way I could have when Kevin and Danny were small. I can throw a baseball, but not for very long. There are things I worry about that younger fathers probably don't think about yet. I worry about being here long enough. I do the math sometimes, and it isn't always comfortable math. Miles will be 20 when I'm 76. I try not to think about that too often because it doesn't help anything. But I'd be lying if I said I never think about it. What I didn't expect was how much he would fill up the house. I lived alone for 6 years before he came. I had gotten used to the quiet. I thought I liked it. I thought it was what I wanted. And then this kid with his cereal bowls and his baseball cards and his 2 big jeans moved into my second bedroom. And suddenly the house was loud and inconvenient and full of somebody else's schedule, and I would not trade it. I would not trade one single Tuesday morning of driving him to school in my truck with the radio on too loud, with him telling me about something that happened at recess that I half understood, not for anything. He still has the backpack. It sits on his bookshelf now, not on his bed. He doesn't hold on to it the same way. He knows where it is. That's enough. He sleeps through the night now. Those first few weeks he didn't always. I would hear him sometimes, not crying, just awake, and I'd get up and check on him. And sometimes I'd sit in the doorway for a while until he went back to sleep. He never asked me to. I just did it. Claire said in her letter that she picked me because I was a good man. I don't know if that's true. I know that I'm trying to be. Miles asked me once, a few months in, why I had decided to take him when I didn't have to. I thought about it for a moment. I said, "Your mom trusted me with the most important thing she had. I wasn't going to let that go." He was quiet for a while. Then he said she was usually right about people. I said, "Yeah, I know." He said she was right about you. I didn't have an answer for that. I just looked at him, this 7-year-old kid with his mother's eyes and his broken watch and his love for a baseball team that was never going to make it easy on either of us, and I thought, okay, we'll figure it out. We go to the park on Saturdays when the weather is decent. He pitches, I catch. My knees don't love it, but I don't say so. He's getting better every week. He has a good arm. He has a natural follow-through that I didn't teach him, that was just in him somewhere. He told me last spring that he wants to play Little League this summer. I signed him up the same day. I've thought a lot about why Claire never called me, and I've stopped being angry about it mostly. Not because it didn't matter, it does, but because I've gotten old enough to understand that people make decisions out of fear that look like cruelty from the outside. She wasn't cruel. She was scared. She looked at what we had, which was real but small, and she looked at what asking me would require, and she made the wrong call. People do that. I've done it too in my life, in different ways. You protect yourself from a hard conversation, and you tell yourself it's protecting the other person. And sometimes you believe that long enough that it becomes true in your own head. What I know is this. The way things end up usually has something to do with the choices people make when no one is watching. Claire chose to keep Miles safe and loved and fed for 7 years on her own. And she did it well. I've seen that in him. In the way he holds on to things that matter. In the way he's careful with people he trusts. That came from her. That was her doing, not luck, not accident. She built a good kid out of hard circumstances, and she did it quietly and without asking for credit. And she made one more choice at the end when she put my name in that envelope. That choice cost her something too. Her pride, maybe, or the story she'd been telling herself about not needing anyone. But she made it anyway, because she loved her son more than she needed to be right. I think about that when Miles is frustrating, which he is sometimes because he is 7 and then 8 and now almost 9, and children are supposed to be frustrating. I think about what it took for her to write my name on that envelope, and it straightens me out. The thing about showing up for someone when it's hard, when you're 63 and your back hurts and you didn't plan for any of this, is that it doesn't feel heroic while you're doing it. It just feels like Tuesday. It feels like packing a lunch and driving to school and sitting in a folding chair at a little league game in 45-degree weather, because your kid is pitching and he wants you there. It feels ordinary. But I think the ordinary things, done consistently, are where character actually lives. Not in the big moments, in the Tuesday mornings. Miles is going to grow up and figure out his own version of all of this. He's going to learn, eventually, the full shape of what happened, that his mother loved him completely, that his father didn't know he existed, that a social worker named Nancy made a phone call that changed 2 lives at once. He'll have to carry that story and make something out of it. I can't do that part for him. What I can do is be here long enough and steady enough that when he gets there, he has something solid to stand on. I didn't earn this. I want to be honest about that. Miles didn't come to me because I deserved him. He came to me because his mother trusted me, and I'm still trying to be worth that trust, one Tuesday at a time.